So basically, I was born and raised in Thailand. All my childhood friends were either Indians or Thais. This story takes place right after the COVID lockdowns ended, when my friends and I had just finished university. We were all trying to get into our respective industries, figuring out our careers. Now I don't have a huge circle of friends, but the few I do have, they're like brothers to me. We look out for each other, always have. And what happened to me? It didn't just happen to me, it happened to all of us. This was one of those situations where curiosity gets the best of you. You chase after something you shouldn't, and before you know it, it's too late to turn back. I had this one friend, I won't mention his name, who studied media and had landed an internship at a really well-known organization. As part of his assignment, he had to choose a project related to media research, and the one he picked? It was about agoras. If you don't know, agoras are a sect of Hindu ascetics in India, known for their extreme rituals that include eating human flesh. You've probably heard the stories, the rumors. His assignment was to research them and create a detailed documentary. Now, since the lockdown had ended and travel restrictions were lifted, he had to go to India for this, and we figured, why not go with him? He'd get his documentary, and we'd get a trip out of it. Seemed like a win-win. The plan was simple: work first, fun later. We were told that near Himachal Pradesh, there was a place where these agori sadhus were often spotted. When we arrived, we started asking the locals if they knew where we could find them. Most people were hesitant, but one local finally told us that agoris don't come out during the day, and they don't like talking to outsiders. And finding real agoris, that was nearly impossible. We kept searching and eventually met a man who worked at a cremation ground by the river. When we asked him if he had ever seen an agori, he hesitated at first, then said, "There's an old Baba who comes here sometimes at night. I think he's an agori, but he doesn't come often." We asked if he could help us meet him. He agreed. "Come back around 2:30 or 3 a.m., he said. "If he shows up, you'll see him then." So that night, we went back. The guy who worked there got into our car, and we all sat in silence, waiting. The night stretched on, but the Baba never came. The man told us to try again the next night. So we did, and this time, just 30 minutes into waiting, he suddenly pointed ahead. There he is. From a distance, we saw a shadow moving toward the cremation ground. The old man disappeared into the darkness. My friend, the one making the documentary, was excited. He and the cremation worker hurried toward the site, while the rest of us stayed back to grab the camera equipment from the car. But before we could even reach them, they came running back, panic written all over their faces, sweat dripping down their foreheads. My friend, who had been so excited just moments ago, was now shaking. "Forget the documentary," he gasped. "We need to leave, now." We didn't question him. We could see the fear in his eyes. We ran back to the car, drove straight to the hotel, and locked ourselves in. Later that night, when he had finally calmed down, he told us what happened. When they entered the cremation ground, they saw the Baba sitting by the fire. At first, he just looked like any old sadhu. But when they stepped closer, they realized what he was doing. He was eating something. Something burnt. And then they saw it. Charred remains. A half-burned corpse. A young girl's corpse. He was eating her flesh. The sight was so horrific, so unnatural that they couldn't bear it. They turned and ran for their lives. Hearing this, all of us felt sick. None of us could sleep that night. That was the end of the documentary. My friend never spoke about it again. We spent a few more days in India, but eventually we returned to Thailand. And that's when things started changing. At first, we didn't notice it. But slowly, we began seeing less and less of our friend, the one who had seen the Baba up close. Every time we asked to meet up, he'd make excuses. He was busy. He wasn't feeling well. And then one day, his mother called us. She was worried. She told us that ever since he came back from India, he hadn't been the same. He spent all day locked in his room, refusing to go to work. He talked to himself. We decided to go see him. When we arrived, we barely recognized him. He looked hollow, unshaven, unkempt, like he hadn't left his room in weeks. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale. And then he whispered something that chilled us to the bone. "Do you remember the Agori Baba?" We nodded. "I see him, all the time. He's here, and he's not alone." We tried to convince him that it was just his mind playing tricks, that he had seen something traumatic, and his brain was struggling to process it. But he wouldn't listen. He insisted, "It's not just him. The girl, the one he was eating, she's here too. She's standing right behind you." We glanced back. There was no one but our friend. He kept staring at something we couldn't see. We urged him to see a doctor, and his family took him for treatment. But nothing helped. Days passed, then weeks. Then one day, his parents called again. He had left the house, completely naked. When they found him, he was screaming, "Let me go! She's calling me. I have to go to her." His family turned to spiritual healers for help, but nothing changed. He kept saying the same thing. "She's calling me. She wants to take me with her." Then came October. We got the call. He was dead. The doctors ruled it heart failure, but we knew. And just when we thought it was over, it started again. Another friend, the one who had been walking ahead of me that night, got into a terrible accident. He was an experienced biker, but one day, out of nowhere, he lost control. His skull was fractured, his shoulder shattered. Both his legs broke. When I visited him at the hospital, he refused to see me. "Don't come here," he said. "You might end up like me." A few nights later, something happened to me. I woke up with sleep paralysis. I don't remember what I saw, but when I got out of bed the next morning, my mother gasped. Red marks covered my chest and back, like someone or something had beaten me in my sleep. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know who's going to be next. But one thing is certain. We should have never gone looking for that Baba.